I paid off my parents' mortgage. Then they demanded I give my apartment to my brother because he has a family. You know those moments in life where you're just sitting alone, maybe sipping your coffee or scrolling through your phone, and suddenly your mind starts to wander? You start thinking about your family, not in the warm, fuzzy, nostalgic kind of way, but in the how the hell did I end up here way. This story starts there. I'm 29M, and for the majority of my life, I've been the guy who does everything right. Not perfect, but responsible. Steady. The one who doesn't make waves. If I were in a family sitcom, I'd be the background character holding everything together while my loud, chaotic relatives ran the show. My older brother, Liam? Yeah, he's the show. He's 31, married young, 2 kids under 6, and a long, impressive resume of temporary jobs. We're talking warehouse loader, dog walker, freelance graphic designer for 2 months, and something called a crypto consultant, which I'm pretty sure just meant guy who convinced my dad to buy Bitcoin in 2017 and then promptly lost the wallet password. He lives at home. My parents' home. Meanwhile, I've been out of the house since I was 19. No safety net. No trust fund. No just-in-case savings tucked away by generous relatives. I worked part-time through college, coded until 2 a.m. most nights, and eventually landed a job as a junior software engineer. It wasn't glamorous. Hell, my first apartment had mold in the shower and a neighbor who blasted 90s Eurodance at 7 a.m. But I stuck with it. Year by year, I climbed. Promotions. Better gigs. I didn't burn out or sell my soul in Silicon Valley. I just quietly worked my way up to something solid. 2 years ago, I bought my apartment. Not a fancy penthouse or anything. It's a modest 2-bedroom with creaky floors and a temperamental radiator. But it's mine. Paid for with my own damn effort, 1 line of code at a time. I'd walk through the door at night, drop my bag, and just breathe. No screaming kids. No passive-aggressive comments about how I never call. No cellos. Peace. That's all I ever really wanted. But here's the thing about being the good one in a family like mine. People start to assume you owe them that peace. I don't think I realized how deep that assumption ran until I looked back and realized how many of my choices weren't really choices at all. It started small. My parents would make these little comments like, Liam's just under so much pressure with the kids, or it must be nice to have time sleeping on weekends. They weren't saying I was selfish. Not out loud. But the implication was always there, just under the surface. You're the independent one, they'd say, as if independence was some kind of shield against stress or burnout. I remember one Christmas, my mom handed me a grocery bag with socks and canned soup while Liam got a smartwatch and a gym membership so he could de-stress. My dad actually winked and said, "He needs more, right, son?" Like it was some inside joke. I smiled. Of course I did. Because that's what you do when you're the reliable one. You smile. You say, no worries. You get over it. But those little things, they start to pile up. Like snow on a roof you never signed up to hold. And soon enough, the roof started to creak. I'd stopped expecting my parents to ask about my life. Every phone call was a running list of Liam's bad luck. Car problems, job problems, parenting problems, health problems. He was always just trying his best. But what about me? I got a promotion once like a real one. Big raise, new title, something I've been working toward for years. I told my mom, excited like a damn kid again, and she said, "That's nice, honey." "Oh, did you hear Liam's back is acting up again? He might need surgery." It hit me then. I wasn't a person to them. I was a tool, a backup plan, a wallet with legs. But I still cared. That's the sick part. I wanted them to care. I wanted my parents to be proud, to say, "You did this on your own." I guess every kid does, even when they're not a kid anymore. So I kept showing up. I kept giving. Quietly. No drama. No asking for anything in return. Just hoping, one day, they'd see me the way I saw myself. That never came. There's this weird moment that happens when you reach your mid-20s, especially if you're from a family like mine. You start realizing that being the responsible one is less about respect and more about convenience for them, not for you. I didn't step into the role with some grand sense of duty. It happened slowly like boiling water. You don't notice it's getting worse until you're already burned. It started with those little phone calls, you know? My mom calling just to mention how things were a bit tight this month. How the heating bill came in higher than usual. How they were thinking of maybe pulling Liam's youngest out of daycare because the tuition was a bit much. But there was always this twist to the conversation, like she was trying not to ask, but absolutely was. And then my dad, always the more stoic one, would follow up with these calm, matter-of-fact conversations. He'd say something about how the bank was being a bit aggressive this month, or that Liam was between jobs again. And he'd just let the silence hang after that, like he was waiting for me to fill it with a solution. And of course I did. At first, it was small stuff. I helped with groceries a couple of times. Paid off a medical bill for Liam's wife when they didn't have the insurance. Stuff like that. Nothing crazy. But it was like putting your hand out to shake someone's, and then they grab your whole arm and don't let go. They started calling more often. Not to ask. Never directly. But the conversations had this rhythm. Struggle. Helplessness. Hope. Repeat. And I kept stepping up. Because I could. Because I felt guilty that I could while they couldn't. Because somewhere deep down, I still believed that helping them might finally earn me a real seat at the table in this family. It didn't. When I made the first mortgage payment, my mom had called, sounding more rattled than usual. She said something about a final notice from the bank, that they might lose the house. She didn't cry, but her voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since I was a kid. And that's all it took. I wired the money that same day. No one asked me to do it, but no one told me not to either. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a stopgap, just until they got things sorted. But you already know how this goes. 1 month became 2, then 3, then a year. And before I knew it, I had my bank app set to send an automatic transfer every month to cover the mortgage for a house I hadn't lived in for nearly a decade. 6 years. 6 years I paid it without fail. Sometimes it hurt. There were months where it meant skipping vacations, delaying car repairs, putting off things I needed for myself. But I always made sure that money got sent. The worst part? I never got a single thank you. Not once. Instead, I got reminders. Subtle ones. Casual little lines from my dad. Like how, it's lucky someone in this family is doing well, or how we'd be out on the street if it wasn't for your stability. Not said with pride, just stated like fact. Like I was doing the bare minimum. And Liam? He never acknowledged it. I don't even know if he knew the full extent of what I was doing. Maybe he thought the house was magically staying afloat on good vibes and overdue notices. Or maybe he knew and just didn't care. That sounds harsh, I know, but I think he genuinely believes that help is something he's entitled to. He's got this way of making dependency look like bad luck. Like life just keeps throwing him curveballs, and it's everyone else's job to catch them for him. And while I was catching those curveballs, no one ever once asked me how I was doing. No one asked if I needed help, if I was tired, if I was okay carrying all of it. I remember this one week vividly. I've been working 12-hour days on a brutal software rollout. The apartment felt like a crash pad, sleep, shower, back to work. I was burnt out, irritable, exhausted, and I still sent the payment. I barely had time to eat, but I made sure their mortgage was paid. That Friday, my mom called, not to check in, not to say hi, but to ask if I could also cover the property taxes because she forgot about them. It wasn't even a question, just another brick tossed on the pile. And I know what some people might think reading this. Why didn't I stop? Why didn't I set boundaries? I wish I had an easy answer. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was fear of becoming the villain in their story, the selfish one who turned his back on family. Maybe it was hope, a naive, fading hope that eventually they'd see me, appreciate me, love me for more than what I could provide. Because I wanted that love, that validation, that pat on the back that never came. Instead, what I got, after 6 years of silently keeping their house from collapsing, was a quiet indifference. When I finally made the last payment, every penny cleared, I sent my mom a screenshot of the final transaction. She called me back. Her voice was flat. No excitement. No emotion. She just said something like, "Oh, good. That's taken care of." And my dad? He didn't even call. Just texted, "Guess it's about time. You've been earning well for years." That was it. No thank you. No dinner invite. No gesture of gratitude. Just the unspoken understanding that I did what I was supposed to do. Because in their eyes, I wasn't the son. I was the safety net. And the worst part was, I let it happen. I enabled it. I paid and paid and paid, and every month that I didn't say no, I told them it was okay to keep expecting it. But something shifted that day. Something inside me cracked wide open when I realized that the only thing tying me to them was obligation. And that obligation was never mutual. They didn't love me more for what I gave. They didn't even respect me for it. They just expected it. and I had finally given everything I could. Every dollar, every ounce of patience, every silent moment of pretending I was okay with being used. I was empty. 2 months. That's how long the quiet lasted after the final payment. For the first time in years, I wasn't siphoning off a chunk of my income every month for someone else's mortgage. I'd started setting some of that money aside. Nothing major, just a savings buffer. A trip fund. A little safety net, the kind I never had growing up. I even let myself think about a vacation. Somewhere warm, with sand and silence. Just the idea of unplugging felt like a rebellion. And then came the dinner invitation. It wasn't anything dramatic. My mom called and said they were having everyone over for a casual Sunday dinner. Nothing out of the ordinary, except they never really invited me. Most family gatherings were group texts where I was an afterthought. So yeah, it felt a little strange, but I convinced myself maybe this was it. Maybe, just maybe, they wanted to say thank you. A dinner in my honor. A nod to everything I'd done for them. Stupid, right? But hope has this ugly way of lingering long past its expiration date. So I went. It was the same house I'd kept afloat for years. Same faded curtains, same creaky steps. Same feeling of stepping into a place where I didn't belong, even though I paid for every inch of it. Liam's kids were running around in mismatched socks, something sticky already on the walls. His wife was in the kitchen, trying to act like we were close. We never had a falling out. We just never had anything real between us. I was the ATM who showed up at Christmas. Dinner was decent. Store-bought lasagna and garlic bread. The kind of meal you make when you're trying, but not too hard. I kept waiting for a speech. A toast. Even a simple "we appreciate you." But the conversation was normal. Small talk. Weather, school, work. Like everything was fine. Like I hadn't spent the last 6 years financially tethered to this house. I was finishing my second glass of wine when my mom brought it up. She started slow, talking about how the house was getting tight. How Liam's kids were growing. How his oldest needed her own room. My dad jumped in, saying something about how it was time they started thinking long-term. I was half listening, nodding politely, until the conversation turned and everything clicked into place. They weren't just venting. They had a plan. My mom said it would make so much sense for Liam and his family to move into my apartment. Not permanently, just for a while, until they could figure things out. My dad backed her up, saying the apartment had plenty of space, and it was just you in there anyway. Liam didn't even look up from his plate. He just shrugged like it was a done deal. Like the idea of taking over the one thing I owned didn't need his input. They wanted me to move back into my old room. The same room I hadn't slept in since I was a teenager. The one with peeling posters and a broken ceiling fan. The one I used to retreat to when they forgot I existed. My dad said something about how it would be like old times, and that was when the air left the room for me. Because I realized they actually believed this was a fair ask. After everything, they looked me in the face and decided the next thing I could give them was my home. It was quiet for a moment, not because they were waiting for my answer, but because they thought I'd say yes. They expected me to say yes. When I didn't respond right away, the tone shifted. My mom's voice got sharper, like I was being difficult. She said something about how Liam had a family and needed the space more. That I was just one person and young enough to bounce back. My dad added that I could save money by living with him again, like he was doing me a favor. Liam finally chimed in, not apologetically, not awkwardly, just casually. He said they'd obviously take good care of it. For the place I sacrificed years of my life for. For the home that was my quiet, my peace, my line in the sand. And I realized in that moment, it wasn't about space. It wasn't about the kids. It wasn't about family dynamics or financial planning. It was about entitlement. They saw everything I had as theirs by default. My money, my time, my space. They genuinely believed I was hoarding something they deserved more. And I think that's what broke something in me. Not the ask, but the expectation that I would say yes. That I should say yes. That saying no would somehow make me the villain. I told them I needed time to think. I went home, shut the door to my apartment, and sat on the couch for hours. Just sat there. No music, no TV. Just silence. And I thought about all the times I said yes. Every unacknowledged payment. Every time I swallowed my feelings to keep the peace. Every time I made myself smaller so Liam could take up more space. And now, they wanted to take the last thing I had. It wasn't even about the apartment anymore. It was about the fact that I had finally built something of my own, and they couldn't stand that it didn't include them. They didn't want to celebrate my independence. They wanted to dismantle it, take it piece by piece, and hand it over to someone they deemed more worthy. Because he had kids, because he struggled, because he fit the mold of someone who deserved help. Not me. I was just the one who could afford to give it. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to beg for understanding. But I wasn't going to give them anything else. They had reached the limit. Saying no should have been the end of it. I wasn't dramatic. I didn't yell. I didn't throw around accusations or dig up every injustice from the past decade, though I easily could have. I just said no. Calm, clear, final. And that's when things got ugly. I don't think I'd ever seen my mom's face twist like that before. Not even during those rare moments growing up when I'd test a boundary. Her voice went sharp instantly, the kind of tone that made you feel like a selfish little kid. She didn't ask why. She didn't try to understand. She just accused. Like I'd pulled something cruel, like I was betraying the very people who gave me life. She said I was selfish, that I'd let my brother struggle in a cramped house with his kids while I lived in luxury. My dad didn't yell. He's never been the yelling type. He's the cold one, the kind who punishes you with disappointment and distance. He just looked at me and said he was ashamed that they raised me better than this, that they thought I was more generous. That word, generous, it hit like a slap, as if years of unacknowledged mortgage payments weren't generous enough, as if losing sleep, sacrificing vacations, and delaying my own financial goals didn't count. Generosity wasn't what they wanted. They wanted obedience. They wanted me to roll over like always. And when I didn't, the gloves came off. Liam got involved then. He said he didn't want the drama, that this was all being blown out of proportion, but every word out of his mouth was laced with guilt. He said it would have been one thing if I were married, if I had a family, if I actually needed the space. But I didn't. So what was I even holding on to it for? He asked why I couldn't just be decent for once. For once. That one stuck with me. Because for 6 years, I was decent. For 6 years, I showed up. Paid up. Shut up. But apparently, none of that counted. Because it wasn't public. Because I didn't wave a flag every time I saved them from foreclosure. Because I didn't demand recognition. I just did it. Quietly. Like the good son I was supposed to be. And now, I was indecent. Because I said no. My mom went nuclear then. She started talking about how they sacrificed everything for me. How I owe them. How none of what I had would have been possible without the childhood they gave me. And I realized right there, she really believed that. She believed that feeding me, clothing me, letting me exist in their home was some kind of loan. A debt that never stopped accruing interest. And every success I had, every step forward I took in life, that belonged to them. They poured in the bare minimum and expected a lifetime of returns. And when I stopped paying dividends, when I finally said, "This is mine," they panicked. They started rewriting history right in front of me, making it sound like I had taken from them, like I was the ungrateful one. My dad reminded me of every birthday party, every pair of shoes, every doctor visit, as if those weren't just parenting, as if I should have spent my adulthood reimbursing them with interest. My mom got personal. She said maybe the reason I was still alone was because I didn't know how to love properly, that I was cold, distant, and emotionally unavailable, just like now. It didn't even make sense. But that's how guilt works. It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to hit something soft. And I'll be honest, it did. I left that dinner full of doubt, second-guessing myself, my motives, my heart. I walked back into my apartment and looked around, feeling something I didn't expect, shame. Not because I did something wrong, but because they made me feel like I did. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat on the edge of my bed, scrolling through texts from old friends, coworkers, even random contacts I hadn't messaged in years. I needed proof that I wasn't the villain they painted me to be. And then something in me snapped. I opened my notes app, wrote out everything I had done for them. Every payment, every favor, every moment I chose their comfort over mine. Not for revenge, not even for sympathy, just for clarity. Because I realized I'd been gaslit by my own family for so long. I couldn't tell which version of me was real anymore. Was I generous? Or stingy? Strong? Or selfish? Loved? Or just useful? That list reminded me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't cruel. I was a damn good son who had been used and discarded the moment he stopped giving. So I posted it. For the past 6 years, I quietly paid off my parents' mortgage so they could keep their home. They never said thank you. Last week, they asked me to hand over my apartment to my older brother because he has a family and I don't need it. Not with names, not with blame, just the truth. I didn't expect a reaction. I just wanted to reclaim my narrative before it was rewritten completely by the people who benefited from keeping me small. But that post, that quiet, honest post, it blew up. And what happened next shattered the last illusion I had left about my family. Because when they saw the truth out in the open, they didn't reflect. They retaliated. I wasn't trying to start a war. Honestly, I wasn't even trying to be brave. That post, the one that laid everything bare, wasn't written out of anger or malice. It was written because I needed a witness. Because sometimes when you're gaslit for so long, you stop trusting your own memories, your own sense of reality. I needed someone, anyone, to confirm that what I experienced wasn't normal, that it was, in fact, messed up. So I posted it. It was short, simple, just the facts. And I ended it with a line I'd repeated to myself over and over that night, like a mantra I was desperate to believe. Generosity without boundaries becomes expectation. Sacrifice without recognition becomes obligation. I went to bed thinking maybe 5 people would read it. By morning, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Hundreds of messages, comments, shares, people reposting it to forums, to personal blogs. Strangers were tagging their siblings, their cousins, their ex-friends, saying this is exactly what I went through. It hit a nerve, not just with people like me, quiet givers, but with those who had been watching similar dynamics from the sidelines their whole lives. The comments flooded in. People said things like, "Your family doesn't deserve you," or "This is why I went no contact too," and "It's always the responsible one who gets drained dry." I started reading the replies obsessively, half in shock, half in validation-fueled relief. But not everyone was a stranger. By that afternoon, the ripple had reached my extended family. My cousin texted me first. A screenshot of my post with nothing but the word "whoa." Then my aunt called. She sounded stunned. Said she had no idea I was the one paying the mortgage. That she thought my parents had been scraping by with their savings. She was floored. Then came the questions. How long had I been helping them? Why didn't I tell anyone? Had I really bought my own place? Was it true they wanted Liam to take it? I answered honestly. And that's when the cracks started showing in the facade my parents had built. Because it turned out they told a very different version of events to the rest of the family. According to them, they were getting by just fine. According to them, I was some selfish, estranged son who barely showed up. According to them, Liam was the golden boy struggling heroically to support his kids. Now, the illusion was breaking apart in real time. Another cousin offered me her couch if I ever need to disappear from the madness. An old family friend messaged me privately to say she always suspected something was off with how they treated me. My childhood best friend's mom, who still lives in the neighborhood, even reached out to say she admired me for breaking the cycle. It felt good, for about a day. Then the rage hit. 3 days after the post, they showed up at my door. All of them. My mom, my dad, Liam. They didn't knock. They didn't call ahead. They just appeared, like I was some rebellious teenager who needed a scolding. Like I was the one who had humiliated them. I was coming back from the grocery store and saw them standing in front of my building, pacing like they'd been waiting. My mom looked livid, her face red and blotchy. My dad had his arms crossed, mouth tight. Liam looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, but still somehow managed to look annoyed with me. I tried to walk past them, but my mom stepped in front of the door. She didn't ask why I posted what I did. She didn't ask how I was doing. She screamed. She yelled that I had betrayed them, that I had embarrassed them, that I had aired our dirty laundry for the world to see, that family matters should stay in the family. My dad demanded I take the post down immediately. Said if I didn't, I was dead to them. Liam, of course, made it about him. Said his wife was upset, that his kids were being asked questions by relatives, that I'd made them look like freeloaders. No one asked why I did it. No one apologized. It wasn't even on their radar. All they cared about was the fact that people knew, that the mask had cracked. I didn't let them inside. I didn't scream back. I just held the door frame and said the quietest thing I'd ever said in my life, and maybe the most powerful. You already told me I owe you everything. I just realized I owe you nothing. Then I closed the door, locked it, and called building security. They left after that, but not quietly. My mom shouted something about how I was throwing away my family. My dad said I'd regret this. And then they were gone. I stood in my hallway for 10 full minutes, just breathing, shaking. And then something wild happened. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was done. The begging, the bending, the giving until it hurt. I had finally cut the cord. And once the initial shock wore off, something settled over me. Something heavy and unfamiliar, but also kind of beautiful. Peace. Not the peace that comes from being left alone. The peace that comes from choosing yourself. From drawing a line in the sand and not backing down, even when they storm it. In the weeks that followed, they tried everything. Emails, messages through mutual friends, voicemails from unknown numbers. I changed my number, blocked everything, sent a cease and desist letter when they wouldn't stop. And I haven't looked back. Because here's the thing about people who only value what you give them. Once you stop giving, they have nothing left to say. I have my apartment. I have my quiet. I have my life. And for the first time in a long time, I have me.